She died at 31. She was buried in a field with no headstone in Clover, Virginia. That same week, her cells were already dividing in laboratories in Baltimore, New York, California. She never knew. Her family found out 22 years later from a stranger on the phone asking for more blood. Her name was Henrietta Lacks, and today the cells taken from her body, without her knowledge, without her consent, generate hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Her family never received a cent. Legally, nothing was stolen. In the last video, I investigated how the U.S. government ran a 40-year medical experiment on black men in Alabama, and how that, too, was perfectly legal at every step. This is the same system. A different body, a different decade, the same arithmetic. Here is the version you were taught. It's accurate, but it leaves out the part that actually matters. For decades, every human cell taken outside the body did the same thing. It died. Every sample, every attempt, without exception. Hers didn't. Dr. George Guy at Johns Hopkins received the sample in February 1951. Her cells divided, then divided again. They kept going, hundreds of cycles, thousands, while every other sample ever collected had died within days. Guy named them HeLa, first two letters of her first and last name, and sent them across the country. I don't dispute that. The science is real. The impact is real. What I dispute is everything that happened next. Because the question I kept returning to was the same one every time. Did anyone ask her? In 1951, no law required informed consent for tissue samples taken during medical treatment. Here is what that meant in practice. Henrietta signed a standard admission form, the same form every patient at Johns Hopkins signed. It authorized the hospital to use, I am quoting directly, any specimens or tissues as the hospital saw fit. She trusted them. She almost certainly didn't understand that any specimens or tissues meant her cells would leave that room in test tubes, be packed on ice, shipped across America, and eventually to every continent on Earth. No mention of commerce, no mention of distribution, no mention of her name. There was already a rule against this. The Nuremberg Code, written in 1947, 4 years before Henrietta's admission, said it plainly. No medical procedure on a human being without voluntary, informed consent. The United States had signed it. It just didn't apply here. Because the people taking the tissue didn't classify it as research. It was a medical procedure. Routine. Ordinary. Filed under a different word. One word. Total difference. That is the legal architecture. Now let me show you the person inside it. Henrietta Lacks was born August 1, 1920, in Roanoke, Virginia. Her mother died when she was 4. She was raised by her grandfather, Tommy Lacks, in Clover, Virginia, a tobacco farming community where everybody knew everybody and the family kept pigs in the yard. She was, by everyone who knew her, a force. She cooked for the entire neighborhood. She danced. She painted her toenails red. She had 5 children. Her cousin Sadie recalled, she used to walk down the road and it seemed like everything just shone around her. By January 1951, Henrietta told Sadie she felt a knot inside. Her GP said it was probably nothing. She insisted on Johns Hopkins. The tumor was 2 centimeters. Aggressive. By August, it had spread through her entire body. Her kidneys shut down in September. She died October 4th, 1951. 31 years old. She was buried in an unmarked field in Clover, Virginia. No stone, no marker. While her cells were already dividing in Baltimore. While Jonas Salk was using HeLa to develop the first polio vaccine in history. A vaccine that would eliminate a disease paralyzing tens of thousands of children per year in the United States alone. Henrietta's body was in a field. Her children didn't know what a vaccine trial was. Her husband David was working a second job to keep them fed. And this is where the story stops being about science. Her family found out about HeLa 22 years later. Not from Johns Hopkins, from a scientist who called the house in 1973 asking for blood samples without explaining what the study was for or why Henrietta's children were being asked. Her daughter, Deborah Lacks, spent the rest of her life trying to understand what had been done to her mother. Deborah said, "I want to know, if our mother cell's done so much for medicine, why can't we get health insurance? Why our family members got to struggle to get medical coverage?" There is no document I found that directly answers that question. This is what HeLa cells made possible. Jonas Salk tested the polio vaccine using HeLa, 1952. Before the vaccine, the United States recorded more than 57,000 polio cases in a single year. Within a decade, the number fell below 1,000. HeLa was used to develop the rubella vaccine, the HPV vaccine. In 1996, cloning research using HeLa led directly to Dolly the sheep, the first mammal cloned from an adult cell. In 2020, HeLa cells were used in early COVID-19 vaccine development. The global biomedical industry built on HeLa generates, by conservative estimates, hundreds of millions of dollars per year. More than 17,000 patents directly cite HeLa cells. The total cumulative value across derivatives, pharmaceutical applications, and licensed research is contested, but no credible estimate places it below the hundreds of millions. Some bioethics literature puts the figure in the billions. Her family received zero. Not because anyone forgot, because there was no legal mechanism requiring anyone to pay them. Her cells became the property of Johns Hopkins the moment they left her body. That transfer was complete, irrevocable, and required no compensation. Deborah Lacks told journalist Rebecca Skloot, "But I always have thought it was strange. If our mother cells have done all that good for all those people, then how come we always be so poor?" Deborah died in 2009. She never had consistent health insurance. And this is the part no textbook explains. In 2013, the full HeLa genome was sequenced and published online, without the family's knowledge, exposing private genetic information about every living descendant of Henrietta Lacks. It was removed, then re-released under a restricted access agreement that gives family members a seat on a review committee. Access, not compensation, a seat at the table. And if you think this was fixed later, it wasn't. I kept looking for the moment when the system changed, when someone drew a line. And then I found 1990. There is an argument I always hear at this point. Different era. You can't judge 1951 by today's standards. So I looked at today. In 1990, the California Supreme Court heard Moore versus Regents of the University of California. John Moore's cells had been taken, also without his full knowledge, and used to develop a patented cell line worth millions. His own doctors held the patent. The court ruled Moore had no property right to his own excised cells. The exact words, "A person has no property right in his own excised cells." California Supreme Court, 1990. So I looked at every decision made between 1951 and 2023. Every document I could access. Every institutional response in the chain. I kept waiting to find the moment where someone crossed a line. I never did. Because in most jurisdictions, there was no line to cross. That is not an excuse. That is the structure. And that structure was maintained, piece by piece, by the people who benefited from it. And what happened next, over the following decades, is the part that still hasn't been fixed. February 1951. HeLa cells taken. Already in the mail within weeks. 1952. Jonas Salk uses HeLa to test the polio vaccine. 1953. HeLa becomes the first human cell line produced at industrial scale. The factory chosen to manufacture them is located in Tuskegee, Alabama. Let me stop there. The same city as the syphilis experiment I investigated last week. The same decade, a different laboratory, a different body. The same logic. Someone else's biology, scaled for someone else's benefit. 1966. HeLa contamination is detected. Her cells had not stayed in their original cultures. They had drifted through laboratories on unwashed equipment, carried on air, and silently infiltrated other cell lines across the world. Researchers in multiple countries had been unknowingly working with HeLa for years. Some of their results invalidated. The true scale of the spread is still disputed. 1973. A researcher calls the Lacks family home asking for blood samples. He does not fully explain why. Deborah Lacks asks him directly, "What are HeLa cells?" He describes them. She understands for the first time that her mother, who she barely remembered, was alive in every laboratory in the world. 2010. Rebecca Skloot publishes The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. The same year, Henrietta's grave in Clover, Virginia, receives its first headstone. 59 years after she was buried without one. 2013. HeLa genome published online without family notification. Removed. Re-released under restricted access. 2021. Henrietta's descendants file a lawsuit against Thermo Fisher Scientific, a company selling HeLa cells commercially for profit. 2023. A federal judge dismisses the lawsuit. No compensation owed. Her cells are still dividing in laboratories today. When I put the Tuskegee case and this case side by side, Alabama 1932, Baltimore 1951, I see something that the textbooks consistently decline to connect. Both subjects were black. Both were denied information. In both cases, the denial was institutional, documented, and legal. In both cases, the benefit went to the institution. In both cases, the people whose bodies made the research possible never received it. I am not calling this a conspiracy. Conspiracies require a meeting. They require someone to intend the harm. What I am calling this is a pattern. And patterns don't require intent. They only require systems that consistently produce the same outcome for the same people, while remaining legal at every step. The mechanism that took Henrietta's cells in 1951 is still legally active. In most U.S. states, your cells, taken during medical treatment today, can be used in research, distributed, even commercialized, without your knowledge, without compensation. Because there is still no federal law that says otherwise. The system didn't break down. It scaled. And today, it's still running. Henrietta Lacks died at 31. She never knew what she gave the world. She never had the chance to say no. Her cells are on every continent on Earth. Her granddaughter still cannot afford health insurance. The system didn't need to erase her. It just needed to file her away. The records are open now. The cells are still dividing. The question, the only question that matters, is who decides what that's worth. Right now, the answer is not her family. If you are a descendant of Henrietta Lacks, or if your family was connected to research using HeLa cells, I want to hear from you in the comments. Not because I have answers, because the record that exists was written by the institutions that benefited. Yours is the record that's still missing. One last thing. Henrietta Lacks was taken from. Her cells moved, replicated, distributed, without her knowledge, without her consent, without legal consequence. Now imagine the same logic applied not to a person, to an entire population. In 1968, the United States needed a military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The United Kingdom owned an archipelago there, the Chagos Islands. Its people had lived on those islands for generations. The solution was bureaucratic. In official documents, the entire population was reclassified as temporary contract workers, people without permanent residency, without legal standing. Then they were removed. The documents that authorize this are still classified. The people are still fighting for the right to return. That is next.